Welcome to the Coach's Table Podcast, where coaches come to grow personally and professionally through real-world application and online education. What is going on, everybody? Happy, almost through the first week of January 2024. Time flies. Natty is just around the corner tomorrow at the time of this recording, at least Monday. So super excited for that. January seems to fly by. It's so funny how the new year seems to fly by right away, and then you're gonna be like, holy cow, we're already into February, and then we're already into March, and then it's summertime and all this cool fun stuff. So super excited about that, guys. The guest that I have on today, I'm very excited for. We have not only a professional relationship, but a personal relationship as well, as we've worked side by side with each other this past year, which has been fantastic. But before I introduce him, before we get going, guys, do us a huge favor and share the show. That's the only way the show grows. Okay, if you are an avid listener, do us a huge favor, share the show. For those of you that are sharing the show, I do appreciate you sharing the show, and I appreciate you guys continuing to push this forward and help other people. If you are watching on YouTube, do us a huge favor, hit the like button and subscribe button. I would appreciate that very much as well. And then, guys, the number one thing that helps people is leaving a review. Okay, the review is the most important because it tells other coaches, other listeners, hey, that this is something that is important and worth their time of listening to. So if you would do us a huge favor, leave the review. I would appreciate that very much. And it would help not only myself, but everybody that's listening and future listeners as well. So put some good karma out into the world in 2024 for y'all. But my guest today, somebody that I've worked with side by side, is kind of funny how we met. We just, he showed up one day, I showed up one day, and we're like, hey man, what's up? But he is a DPT, CSCS certified, and a PT as well. And what's fantastic about this is we're going to kind of talk about how we can bridge the gap and have a more cohesive, quote unquote, high performance model, if you will, but how we can work together as departments rather than just in silos, because you see this far too much. You see this far too often. Whether you've experienced it or you know people that experienced it, there's too many of us working in silos. So Mr. Santiago, what's going on, man?
How you doing, Ricky? I'm really glad to be here. Honestly, I feel like this is the start of a really cool, hopefully, career with the dissemination of information and collaboration with the sports performance world. And I'm excited to kind of get going with things.
Yeah, man, me too. So do us a huge favor real quick, kind of tell everybody, where you're currently at, what you're currently doing, and then what's next for you for those that don't know you yet, but you will here soon. Everybody's going to know you here soon because you're the next big fish in the industry, huh?
Hopefully I live up to today's. So I'm actually a physical therapist, like Ricky mentioned. I finished school actually back in May, so I'm fairly new to being licensed. But a little interesting thing about me is that the past 3 years of school, I got integrated into the the sports medicine department of UCF football, which is kind of what got me involved and interested in this realm. During my time in school, I also ended up getting my CSCS. I did a couple internships with UCF athletics, kind of pseudo internships. I knew the staff, and I just went in there and always asked questions and helped out with things. And also an internship in a private-based clinic. So not a lot of formal coaching experience, but a lot of really, really smart people I've learned from in the sports performance world this year, Ricky being one of them for sure, which I think has improved my perception in this environment, trying to rehabilitate athletes. After graduation, I ended up coming to the University of Mississippi Medical Center for a sports physical therapy residency. This first phase of it was with Jackson local teams. It was with Jackson State, and that's how I met Ricky. Working mainly with football, but I rehab kind of all of athletics and facilitating things. So kept me real busy. But I was also at Millsaps College helping out. I was doing some coverage with Tri-County Academy. So really, really busy fall for me. The second phase of my residency is going to be over at Ole Miss, working with their athletic department, which I got a small integration during fall with football, which was good to kind of get acclimated over there. And then I do a little bit of work here in the clinical setting out the outpatient ortho clinic, which is more traditional PT. And then I finish out with a training camp at the Saints. So really excited about that, trying to integrate myself into a higher level of athletics. And yeah, residencies don't generally happen with physical therapists, but it is something that is available to be able to specialize in certain aspects of sports or medicine in general. You can do like neurological PT, orthopedic PT, and obviously I'm doing one in sports medicine.
Yeah, that's awesome. So this episode is sponsored by TeamBuilder. TeamBuilder is the #1 performance platform for strength coaches around the world. Their software provides coaches with an elevated experience when it comes to program development, data tracking, and staying connected with athletes and clients. Coaches also have access to consultations with TeamBuilder's in-house sports scientists to help manage and analyze data. Head to teambuilder.com and sign up with promo code TABLE to start your free 30-day trial. That is TeamBuilder, TeamBuildr.com, and sign up with promo code TABLE to start your free 30-day trial. Throughout your time in residency, you have a diverse experience with high school athletes, with collegiate athletes, and then soon to be professional athletes, or at least at professional levels in professional organizations, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you kind of look at where you've been so far at a Power 5 level with UCF and now going to Ole Miss and then mid-major levels and everything from that standpoint, what do you notice as a difference between those levels, whether that's P5 to mid-major, college to high school,
Mm-hmm.
and then the professional one we can talk about later, but what do you kind of notice as the differences between those two from like a sports med, PT, SNC-esque relationship?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing that I saw, especially specifically when I went to Ole Miss, is how integrated everyone is. There's no real like you said, silos in that environment. It truly is the essence of the performance unit. Um, the strength staff is walking into the training room pretty much periodically, like multiple times during the day. They have
Yeah.
several meetings on talking about load management and trying to translate that to the head coach so we can kind of work through preventative measures. Obviously, just an abundance of resources and a bunch of personnel to be able to work with. That's the biggest difference. And obviously, the higher stakes that you have there.
Sure.
There are obviously, like, especially like as a new individual in that environment, a little bit of drawbacks for a high level environment. You really got to work yourself up into that system. You're not going to go in and do a ton of stuff because they really need to make sure that you know what you're doing before you get
Yeah.
hands on.
Mm.
As opposed to something in lower levels. They're a little bit more flexible because they do need the help because they don't have the resources or the personnel to do it.
Yeah.
So lucky and maybe a little unlucky in some days. Jackson State, that's kind of the dynamic that I
Sure.
had was they needed the help and I could offer it. So I got very integrated in pretty much all aspects of that environment.
Mhm.
I was helping out in the weight room.
Mhm.
Um, I was helping up in sign coverage, which is not traditional for physical therapists to do, but it's kind of
Sure.
part of the job if you're in that environment. And
Mm.
obviously, I got my education and credentials through that stuff too, just to make sure that I was top notch in that and could manage it if
Yeah.
it came up. But there's a lot of good things in the lower environments, like I said, like not having as many resources and equipment really makes you think.
Mm.
And I think for
Mm.
me, that's been the most positive part of this experience is like working to actually utilize my knowledge and philosophies that I built over time into just movement of the human body, as
Yeah.
opposed to, oh, I have all this equipment. I have zero gravity like treadmill and a pool that I can use. If you don't have those things, you got to get really creative to still bring adaptation to the system. So
Mm.
and I think for me it's both levels, even at high school levels, like there's always something positive and obviously a little bit of drawbacks with everything. So
Yeah, because that's essentially how we clicked, if you will. For those obviously that are listening, y'all don't know, but we worked with football, and injuries do occur. So we had some injured folks, and they were coming through their RTP process, and we were standing on the sideline of the practice field, and a guy was doing short ACLs from a hamstring standpoint, And, we were sitting there and you're like, just asking me questions about like, hey, well, like what drill would do this or what drill would do that. And it wasn't a matter of like, I know more than you or you know more than me. It was a matter of like, how can we integrate this together? And it was like, hey, like from a physics standpoint, from a standpoint of, you know, force into the ground and at specific force vectors and velocities and angles, this would, help with this hamstring, right?
Mhm.
And we were able to like discern and talk about not only drill selection, but also the technique amongst it that was utilized for this individual, and then get the athlete feedback right away while both of us were standing there asking them questions of like,
Yeah.
how does this feel? What did you think of this? Did you feel this? Does it feel better? And we were able to get instantaneous feedback. And then it was like, cool. Like the level of trust between us like increased there because we were able to have an intellectual conversation without judgment of like, I do RPT, I do SNC, I do this, so you can't be a part of that. It was very much a collaborative effort. And it was, and it has been ever since, right? And then it's like, okay, well, how then the next question was like, how do we integrate something of this nature more across a multitude of not only athletes but a multitude of teams and specific individual cases and specific stuff. And that's kind of how we got started from a standpoint of, hey, how do we collab together and work together? Because the biggest thing that you see all the time is departments operate in silos, right? And so the handoff per se, or the aspect of like RTP from an athlete sadly gets injured to they don't do anything to just ice to stay off of it, right? Which you see all the time. And then 72 hours later, nothing really occurs. And then they go to the AT and they get stim and ice again. And well, set them out for 2 weeks and then put them full go back into the play, right? And it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense, and that happens all too often.
Yeah. No, I think that was a big, big part of why I really learned to grow in that environment was working with that collaboration.
Yeah.
I think for me, that's where I see myself really investing my efforts in all the athletic environments that I go to.
Hmm.
As physical therapists, we get educated a whole freaking lot about what rehab entails. And
Yeah.
that rehab is through the lens of how to return people to normal human function, which is very important because that's generally the population that we work with. However, in sports environments, especially in a high level sport environment, when there's individuals that are NFL or NBA level athletes, the level of function they're returning to is not normal. All right.
Yeah.
Like they're not normal functioning humans.
Yeah.
And somebody that gets just the baseline education that we get in school is not the best equipped individual to manage that individual that's
Hmm.
returning to that. For
Hmm.
example, post ACL. Yeah, you're going to be able to walk, jog, maybe run in a straight line, but you won't be able to accept force in a cut and explode out and do all this explosive and dynamic activities and all the intricacies that come with sports performance development. You're not doing that throughout rehab. I'm not prepping you to do that. Generally,
Right.
it does happen that, all right, I got you to normal human function and then it's handed off. And all those stimulus are introduced for the first time with strength and conditioning coaches, which
Hmm.
there's plenty. And I think you've done a really good job with what you've had in your environment of coaches that have a
Yeah.
really good system to integrate that. But in terms of optimizing things, people that have the education of rehab and also the education of what comes about with sports development are just better suited to optimize that.
Hmm.
Not to say I would do a way better job than every single strength coach. I'm sure there's a lot of strength coaches that I
Sure.
can learn from. But in
Hmm.
terms of tissue healing, time frames of progressions, and different types of strategies that we utilize as clinicians, that's always a benefit to add to that system in
Sure.
RTP. Um, so that's where I learned, honestly, the most valuable lessons in my sports medicine journey is learning from strength coaches like I did that day.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that I know exactly how you guys develop that foundation of athleticism or fundamentally develop that athleticism in those individuals, so I can do that appropriately throughout the different phases of rehab as the system allows it and is ready for it. Just so they're not doing that the first time when they're out in the field, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, because what you see is this is athlete gets injured, they sit out, and then what you see is they return to practice, but there's no control, thought process, approach, system to get them back to practice. And what I mean by that is, you know, if you have data, which I think everybody should have data, if you're not, I think you're really falling behind. But if you have data now, right, and you're wearing GPS units, and this can be for football, this could be for basketball, whatever the case may be, you look at when the injury occurred, right? Okay, when did the injury occur? What was player load, total distance, high speed running, all these other metrics that you can come up with and say, okay, the body could not accept whatever or handle whatever, right? Or an injury occurred, a freak accident, you name it. As you are progressing them to get back into return to gait, return to practice, return to play, you have to then, hopefully what you should do is put the GPS back on them, allow them to go through practices, and then have gates, if you will, that say, this is our test measure one, which is 25% of his highest, or then 50%, and then 75%, or number of cuts, number of total high speed running. And that then goes into the tissue healing and everything from that standpoint. The thing is though, if you don't have those numbers, if you don't have the metrics, it's hard to determine their reliability and is the athlete prepared to do what the sport requires. And I think a lot of people need to understand that. Like, it's not, can they just walk? Can they just jog? It's what the sport requires. So, and then what their specific positions require as well. How many jumps, how many high speed runnings, how many decels, and the forces in which those specific, position specific and game specific scenarios require. Decels are going to be way higher. Acels are going to be higher. Jumps are going to be higher. Number of contacts, like all of those things, number of changes of directions, can all be quantified that you can then use as a roadmap to prepare them for what the sport requires, what their position requires, in combination with the tissue healing practices and all this stuff. The thing is people and multiple departments, that takes a lot of communication, that takes a lot of collaboration, that takes a lot of integration, and that takes open-mindedness to try new things. And it also takes people doing their job at a high level and being interested in it to say, let's bring this guy back. And a lot of times we just don't see that.
Yeah. And I mean, something that I've seen over the years in the sports medicine environment is that we're always like following your guys' lead. When new technology comes about and like the force plates came about, I feel like that is super integrated into the development of performance. And you guys kind of take that data and make sense of it. And then we kind of piggyback off of it. Like, all right, that looks cool. We should use that.
Sure.
So that's what I'm trying to kind of bridge is understand that the integration of all those different metrics and KPIs and everything to be able to fundamentally give that athlete capacity, honestly, as aggressively as possible, the phases of healing allows safely to be done, in order for them to be able to have a foundation of the tissue resiliency, of the synchronization of the muscle tendon unit, and
Yep.
just overall capacity for those things, to better get them ready when they're about to return to play. Because then they don't have to ease their way in as long, and their
Sure.
performance is going to be a lot higher because they're not as hesitant, like, oh, I never really jumped like this, like psychologically and things of that nature. But yeah, no, all those data points and stuff that a lot of frameworks for return to play in sports medicine at high levels kind of are integrated into. A big one would be, let's say, a return to play for lower extremity. Oftentimes you see clinicians just look at not RSI, we should be looking at RSI.
Yeah.
Look at limb symmetry index, so symmetry of strength contralaterally, and maybe use some different type of biodex, which gives you good
Mhm.
numbers. But
Mhm.
the only real dynamic thing that we do was like the hop testing, which
Sure.
it's helpful to some degree, but I've come to see that high level athletes and athletes in general are probably the most gifted people at compensating and being able to perform with deficits in their biomechanics.
Yep.
So oftentimes, yeah, you pass the test and you have good symmetry in your hopping, but it's all coming from your hips. You're not really utilizing the knee, which is what we're rehabbing.
Sure.
There wasn't before a real way to quantify that quality of function, and making
Mm.
sure that it's actually happening in the correct place, essentially. But RSI and force plates measurements helps kind of bridge that gap a little bit more. It gives you a lot of data and ways to quantify the value of what is actually happening in the plyometric, as opposed to just taking a distance. And you see that throughout. You see it for upper extremity stuff. You see it for all sorts of stuff, like the integration of those data points for the return to play. But something you also mentioned that I think is super important, I think is a big part of where we collaborate as professions, is the overall like philosophy or system for workload management, for um, work capacity management and all that, and making sure that we're not overtraining these individuals, because I think in that environment in sports in general is such a high prevalence of that occurring, because they're training and doing things 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Mm-hmm.
most high level college, or not most high level, but most athletes probably benefit from more rest than more training, because they don't objectively quantify exactly what they're doing, and they always think more is best, which
Yeah.
isn't exactly the case. And unfortunately, some clinicians and practitioners and coaches also see it that way, because they're a little antiquated in their thinking.
Mm.
Those values, I think, are super, super big parts of the puzzle to really optimize the human performance unit.
Yeah, absolutely right. You see this all the time because what you talked about as athletes being the biggest compensators is, so true. And as coaches, practitioners, as you're assessing movement, looking at movement, etc., and you have the ability to quantify things, whether it's percentage of asymmetry or if you have the ability to look at the kinematics of them and actually have the tech to
Yeah.
go through the kinematic process of it, and you can see the differences in, like you said, in movement quality.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you used to bend your knees a lot, but now you're really sticking your butt out, right? Well, that's an issue, you know. Or hey, you used to actually, bend a little more your depth in regards of like a counter movement jump or your RSI and all this other stuff too. Is like it's fantastic because now you can hopefully get at the specific root causes. But the thing is what we have to understand too is like once an athlete gets injured, unfortunately, they're never going to be the same, right? And the psychological stuff that comes into that from an injury, from like, and I'm talking a legit injury. I'm not talking like I bruised my thigh, and so therefore we're talking like an actual injury, and the psychological components to it, and how the psychological components through rehab and training can help increase confidence in athletes. Is I think that's a huge boat that a lot of coaches, athletes, practitioners, clinicians hope to achieve, but fall short of.
Yeah, no, I agree. And with what you said, that after a major injury, you're never really the same, is also true physiologically. Like the
Mm,
healing tissue, the collagen, the muscle fibers, the bones, that regeneration of tissue is always a little bit weaker than its natural state.
sure.
Um, that is something that is interesting. But again, the right system, the like collaboration can really help them get back to the highest level possible of optimizing that performance again.
Hmm.
And a big thing too that I was just thinking about is the biggest thing I've really like come to value about sports performance in general. as a clinician that I think a lot of other clinicians could really value from in the sports environment is fully like understanding the different functions and capabilities of your muscle tendon units and in plyometrics and in strength and conditioning. The kind of lens that I see it through is looking at the force velocity curve, right? Like in school, we get taught that, right? Part of our physics and everything. But they
Yeah.
pretty much just tell you that, all right, here is max strength, here's max velocity. If you train in one place, you're going to lose potential benefits in the other. And
Yeah. Quality and other. Yeah.
that's pretty much all they really tell us. They don't really tell us, all right, how do you bring about that different capacity for the muscle? Because it is
Mm-hmm.
important, even in the geriatric population, for example. Like when you have a 70-year-old Nana that's falling, doesn't have coordination or whatever, usually, and very generalized, because definitely there might be vestibular issues and dizziness and all that stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
usually those individuals can really benefit from power training because they need to move quick in your strategy to catch yourself to make sure you don't fall. And that's all power. That's quick muscle force production. Um, those people back in the day when I was working, and I'm sure like if I ever get an opportunity again, like I'm making people jump, like a 70-year-old lady jumping for the first time after 30 years. And like, yeah, it sounds kind of crazy and scary, but I made sure to build a foundational capacity of what is required through that force velocity curve to make sure that that's something that they're able to accomplish. But yeah, learning and really diving deep into the full spectrum of that curve and how I can bring about adaptation in that curve is something I really, really value. And it gets super interesting, especially in places like football, when there's so much variability of function within the people that you're working with. You either have the really fast skill players or the very big, powerful bigs and linemen. And working through that full curve and trying to make sure you're building a good foundation of power, speed, strength through the rehab continuum, and making sure that when their training starts, that's also being integrated into, um, again, just optimizes things to a higher degree. And I
Yeah.
think also something I've learned is that no matter the type of athlete, they still need capacity for dynamic athletic capabilities. Like even your bigs that are 300 pounds that are just blocking all day, they still
Mm-hmm.
need some capacity of being able to be fast, to change direction, to go max speed at certain distances. Because sports is dynamic, especially basketball and football. Like you can't really mimic the same activity twice. Something's always happening. There's different stimuluses. There's different levels of metabolic like degradation and all this stuff that happens throughout sports that you're not going to be able to really mimic that same activity again. And when there's variability in what's happening on the field or the court, you always got to react. So yeah, I'm always blocking here, but oh shoot, they just like came into this gap, so I got to go sprint out and try to block them out there or whatever. So making sure that you give them capacity for that full function of being a dynamic athlete. And again, that's the only place I learned that was talking with strength and conditioning coaches and learning from strength and conditioning coaches, because there's no physical therapist that's talking about that coming out of school. It doesn't have that integration of sports performance like I was able to do.
Yeah. Well, and like to go one step further with like the force velocity curve or just in regards of like looking at exercises and how we can manipulate and I don't mean manipulate in a bad way. I mean manipulate by change intent of the exercises. If you look at the dynamics correspondence criteria and you go, "Oh, there's 5 criteria to this that I can adjust to see how we can respond to this particular exercise," right? Like everybody knows you can take a bench press and you can change the range of motion. Everybody knows that you can change like how much force production by doing eccentrics or isometrics, or can change the dynamic of effort if you put a VBT component on it, or you can change like the rate of force development or the sequence of muscular work. So like when you look at it, and that's the dynamic correspondence criteria, you can say, well, as I move from general to specific with a rehabilitation process along this force velocity curve, if I change the dynamics of effort, right, keeping all things the same, does that change me on this force velocity curve? Yes. Well, if I change the sequence of muscular work, right? Or if I change the rate of force production, does that change me on the force velocity curve? Yes. Well, what does that do? Well, that helps me create, adjust, or potentially respond to adaptations appropriately, or to see where you're at, right? And if you look at like the sequencing of muscular work, like you're saying, if somebody then gets injured, right, and now their sequencing is different because now they're more reliant or compensating on a hip or knee or an ankle, or a lack thereof is what you see more than often. Like, this range of motion in my ankle isn't occurring anymore because what it's doing is really protecting my knee. So therefore I am more hip dominant, but we know the issue is the knee, right? And so as you like go through that process, we can start to look at that stuff and say, how can we adjust this one exercise and do different things to elicit a different adaptation to ride this force velocity curve, if you will. But in order to do so, we need to prepare them for the capacity to do so, which is then driven by our data and our understanding of the game and of the position and the specific requirements of such. And when you get into that level of depth and you get into that level of like, well, how do we do this? You can really start to, every case is different, but you can really then start to lay things out to say, this is how we approach stuff. And maybe you don't explain this to athletes because it's a lot for them, but as professionals, this is the depth and the level of understanding that we can have and should have to say, how do we take an athlete from here, point A, to point B, which is complete return to play, complete blah, 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 whatever. What metrics do we need to hit? Do we understand this stuff? And how can we go from a general to a specific, sport specific, or competition based in order to look at all that and have detailed questions? But that requires a ton of thought process. That requires a large amount of understanding of the physiological components of the body and the contextual components of the game, which a lot of people don't want to go through that process of. They just want to say, here's some stim, here's some ice, wait 2 weeks and get back out there,
Yeah, and dude, this level of conversation is like what excites me about being integrated into this environment. Like, I'm not speaking in these terms with any physical therapist or athletic trainer unless they have that background. Not a lot of them do. And even if they do have like some experience with strength and conditioning and stuff like that, they never dive in deep into like force velocity profiling, velocity decrement training, and working through like the full specific phases of a plyometric and really regiment force acceptance, so that the athletes component of that jump is being improved upon there, because that's where we see with our SI numbers and all different metrics with first plate testing, that's where they're missing, instead of just getting them out there performing the gross motor function to try to maybe eventually improve. This allows me to be more purposeful with my approach and seeing exactly what you guys are performing, exactly the metrics you guys are looking for, or looking at to improve upon function, and seeing where you guys get them to, so I can strive to facilitate that as much as humanly possible. And you don't see that everywhere. You don't see that at NFL levels. You don't see that at NBA levels. Really good organizations do, but the amount of effort, like you said, and purposeful approach to this systems that it requires for a physical therapist or any other type of practitioner that's not familiar with these things is a lot. Like, this could be a PhD that I can take on and actually get to a level of understanding, like a lot of the strength and conditioning coaches that are very advanced in their careers can get to. So I think it will be some time for me to really, really dive into that, but just learning about those things is so interesting. And like I said, like, knowing those things for my athletes is always going to help optimize everything. The collaboration and conversations, I think, with the staff is also very different. Like, you and I can have these types of conversations, but most of the times clinicians aren't having these conversations with the staff. They're just like, oh yeah, the swelling's gone, the range of motion's gone,
Yeah.
But
Well, what occurs a lot of times is like, and this is where I think integration of professional development together helps out. And what I mean by that is, if you take your sports med staff to include the PTs, the ATs, all this other stuff, and you then take your strength and conditioning staff and you say, hey, let's do professional development together. And what I mean by that is, whether we bring somebody in, whether we communicate our current thought processes, because a lot of it I think is misunderstanding. I think a lot of it is miscommunication. And what I mean by that is like words mean things. So when I say X, here's what I actually mean rather than what you think I mean because I didn't articulate it, because we don't have a shared vision, a shared understanding, and everything from that standpoint. But if you just have everybody operating in silos, you could say, oh, this guy's good. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Right? Like, what does that mean? He's ready from what standpoint? You know what I'm saying? And a lot of it is like, well, let's just do personal and professional development together. Let's put PowerPoints together or do whiteboard sessions together. Hey, when I think of exercises, when I think of returning a guy to play, here's my thought process and here's the criteria that I go through in order to say, let's go from there. And then I select, hey, right now, maybe it's the range of motion and direction of movement that's the most important and the sequencing of work. Well, let's get that right first before we add rate of force development. Probably a smart idea, right? Rather than let's just do rate of force development first. No. Let's make sure that their range of motion and direction of movement or the force vectors is good first. Great. Okay. What does that mean and how can we quantify that? Well, good question, right? So you just go through each one of them and you work it out. So then you can have a shared understanding, and maybe you do documentation, which you probably should do for standards, for all this other stuff to say when these metrics are hit and met, we can say he's graduated or moved on to the next stage, which is, okay, let's do more force production. Let's do dynamic of effort and all that stuff. Well, what does that look like now? You know what I'm saying? And you can go through that process and you can work together. But what a lot of it is I think we don't understand what they mean or what they say. And a lot of times it may not be looked at in the context of sport. It may be looked at it from a generality standpoint. Well, they've reached X, so therefore they're good. It's like, well, are they? Are they?
Yeah, my mentor always said, tests don't guess, Like a lot of times we take a lot of subjective assessments, even in the clinician's world, a lot of people do it because it's easier. I've seen it a bunch of times, whatever. And yeah, you do maybe get to a level of expertise with that if you do are purposeful with like at least the fundamental understanding of what human movement should look like. But you're never going to be able to beat objective measures. That gives you as much, like the most amount of information that you can really work through. And again, when you start understanding systems that are more broad than just strength and range of motion, you can really be more purposeful in completely integrating the capacity of function for those individuals. Like, I want to be able to fully understand every single metric that a strength coach goes through in their approach to improving their performance. So I know exactly the stimulus that I need to introduce throughout my rehab process. And you guys have so many flushed out strategies of how that's done, and the different ways of like looking at that system and changing different variables. Because at the end of the day, like both of our professions, like we have a system in front of us, and the amount of loading, the amount of intensity, and the different stimuluses that can be brought into that system and are going to bring out some type of adaptation. And understanding how to bring that adaptation in the most purposeful way, I think, does require fleshing out those different systems and understanding of what it is required to do for an athlete. So.
Well, and then, how do we integrate it together, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, you got to look at like the athlete as a whole first. You can start to bucket and group specific athletes together and say, okay, what does this athlete need? Or if we look at the injuries across the board, like if we do a year in review, let's look at the injuries sustained, right? Okay, well, what happened? Or what injuries do we see commonalities? Do we see trends? Do we see some of these other things? And then ask the question, well, what could we have done better? Well, whatever the case may be, right? But even those conversations aren't occurring a lot of the times. And it's like, well, how can we get better, as staffs, as departments, if we aren't even willing to have conversations to ask ourselves how we can get better? Like that to me, I don't understand. And it's like, okay, well, what did we do wrong? What could we have done better? Where did we fall short? What did we not track? Do we have measurables? Did we improve? It's like, I say this all the time. but I firmly believe it. Like, I think each department should run themselves as a business and ask yourself, like, what did we do better? Like, did we sustain employees or did we lose employees? Yes or no? And if we did lose them, did we help them get better positions? Yes or no? Right? Did we grow them? Did people make more money? Did we get raises? Did we reduce, the number of injury percentages and all? Like, there's so many other things you can look at broad scale from department standpoints that you can now ask yourself, like, are we doing net positive or net negative things? Right? And
Most places do kind of get complacent. It's like, all right, nothing extremely detrimental occurred, so we're just going to keep doing things the way we've done them, and we don't need to work on constantly improving because it worked good enough, But I
yeah.
think being purposeful with really reflecting and seeing, all right, yeah, you've done this for 20 years, but like, shoot, am I doing what's best with the amount of information that's out there? And
Mhm.
oftentimes that is not the case. So I think being open-minded to growing and being like constructively critical about yourself and the people around you to make sure that we're doing the best we can
Yeah.
to improve is what it takes. And I think just being surrounded by an environment that does that is what constitutes a high performance unit, which
Yeah.
again, I think it's the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how important or imperative do you think it is for DPTs or PTs or even ATs at that matter to potentially get their CSCSs to attempt to understand or at least have more knowledge in the sector of S&C so we can collaborate better?
Yeah. I mean, I get asked this a ton by individuals. It's like, oh, you think I should get it, this, and that. I do think, honestly, for the vast majority of clinicians, even if you're working, like I said, in geriatric or general population settings, they would extremely benefit in
Mhm.
the way that they would purposefully approach training, because we are training the body to improve its function.
Yeah.
And in our education, we don't get what a rep scheme looks like to improve on strength. We don't get like basic things of that
Sure.
nature and how to periodic. Wow, I can't speak English. Periodize. I can't say this word. Periodization.
Periodically. Yeah.
Periodically, and integrate that into the system to make sure the adaptations are occurring to give capacity for what's coming next. Um, and I think, yeah, they would 100% benefit from that. But I do tell individuals that do want to be involved in sports that are interested in getting that credential that, yeah, that's 100% the first step. But it is
Mm,
that exact thing. It's the first step of just
mm,
knowing the vernacular of what's going on and just the major generalized concepts of the sports environment, sports performance environment.
yeah. Yeah.
But if you really want to be in that environment and completely optimize what you want to do, that's one of many steps that you should take.
Mm,
Because you need to understand a lot more concepts that are being done in that environment that aren't covered in that book. Like, no strength and conditioning coach will ever go, all right, I got this book. I know this stuff. Cool. I'm good to go. And now I'm going to go and work with all these teams. And that's it. I only need that information. No, the successful ones are growing and learning and looking into research, looking and collaborating with peers to understand that those different concepts and understand new concepts even better. So yeah, as clinicians, maybe we don't have all the time in the world to really refine that skill and that knowledge, but being purposeful in attempting to understand that to the highest degree, I think will only make you better.
I
Um,
think you'd be surprised at the number of strength and conditioning coaches that pass their CSCS and then say, I'm
that's
good.
it. Yeah.
I think you would be surprised at the large majority of them. Now, the majority that or the people that are getting better, that are meeting other people and having deep level conversations
Yeah.
and getting better skill sets and doing all that stuff, yes. But I think you'd be very surprised at the number of S&C coaches that honestly pass the CSCS because it's a barrier to entry and
Mhm.
then do zero I'm going to say self-continuing education
Yeah.
because, yeah, you have to do continuing ed for your certification to renew and all this other stuff. But I'm talking taking interest
More than a bare minimum.
and, yeah, you'd be surprised that the large majority are
Yeah.
like, I got my
I think
CSCS, I'm good.
that's probably coming from just me being lucky enough to the ones that I've been
Sure.
surrounded by being
Yes.
cheerleaders and very, very, very purposeful strength and conditioning coaches.
Yeah.
And I think from that section of those, that
Yeah.
environment is where I've thankfully been able to like grow in.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think clinicians would 100% benefit, especially if they want to be with high level athletes. That would optimize things way, way more. Is both getting the CSCS to understand the foundation of that, but like you
Mhm.
said, if you want to be the best, you got to learn what the best are doing, and that takes a lot of effort and purpose. And again, when we go through 3 years of post grad and 4, 5 years for me of undergrad, that's a really hard pill to swallow. That all right, I got to keep on grinding and learning way, way, way more. Like, dude, I've been in school for so long. So I think that is what kind of stops a lot of people. But again, the people that get to that level, I think, are the people that are hungry and passionate about learning and optimizing that performance as much as humanly possible.
Yeah, well, I think this is just me speaking out of personal experience here, but I've learned so much more outside the academia world
Yeah.
than I did in the academia world. Now, let me preface that with saying what I did learn in my master's program is a fantastic foundation.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the foundation right, then you're going to struggle.
Yeah.
But the fantastic foundation that I learned in regards of physiology and in regards of how the body works and all that stuff
Yeah.
allowed me to accelerate the thought process of, okay, if we know and understand physiology, what can we do to apply changes or
Yeah.
get changes or adaptations or everything else from that standpoint? But I will say I learned so much more outside the academic world
Yeah.
on myself, speaking with people, talking to people, doing internships, communicating on social media platforms and all this other stuff than I ever have in the academic world and reading.
Definitely. I think that just goes to the nature of the world is not black and white.
Yeah,
No industry is black and white, so nothing's ever going to match what you see in a textbook.
correct.
So really learning the variability of different systems and different things out there and how to bring about that prior knowledge to kind of work through those problems. That's again me too, where I value most of my learning is what I did afterwards and outside of school.
Yeah,
Um, because that's what it takes. You know, if you want to work in that environment, you got to learn in that environment.
yeah. Well, and it changes the aspect of application. You know, in the academic setting, like we had lab stuff in our academic setting too. And I remember this distinctly. I distinctly remember this conversation. So we were in grad school, and one of our professors was saying that every single athlete you work with, you need to find time to test them on a, oh gosh, what's it called? Where you sit in a chair, and it's a leg extension and it provides resistance.
Yeah. Biodex.
Gosh, is that what it is?
Biodex is isokinetic dynamometer.
That's exactly what it was. Okay, thank you. So we remember distinctly having an argument. Our class had an argument with this professor, and he said every
Mm.
single one of your athletes needs to go and sit. You need to find the time to book them, to have them all come into this setting in the
Yeah.
lab and test. And it's like, he's like, it'll take about 15 minutes per person. And at that time, I was like really deep into football, and I'm like, there's 100+ athletes here. You think we're ever going to find the time, one, and then two, just to get one metric of level of asymmetries? Absolutely not. We'll never ever do that. And I remember distinctly the class having an argument with him, right? And we're like, dude, we have so many other things to accomplish besides just that. And he's like, no, this is the most important thing, blah, blah, blah. And to me, what that showed was like just the sheer example of like, you've never left the academia world.
Yeah.
So in theory, that sounds great. And sure, great, cool. Especially like on a one-on-one situation, got it, cool, right? Not anything against it, but for a whole team, and you must do this. And he was talking in absolutes. And I was just like, bro, absolutely not. And
Yeah.
we And it's just like, now we have the ability with like force stacks and all this other stuff to be like, well, we can test that in 30 seconds. Like,
Yeah.
I don't need to go and do that. But the point that I'm making was just that he was so dead set on, and
Yeah.
then he was saying like, if we don't do this, we're bad coaches, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, when's the last time you coached a team? When's the last time you actually like were in the trenches? You aren't. You're in the academia world, and that's all you do. So in theory, it sounds great. Don't get me wrong, but in an actual application, it's not accurate and it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And let alone if we do that, what information is that going to tell us that's going to make us do something different?
Yeah.
Nothing? Okay, well then, you know what I'm saying? So the point that I'm making is like, when you get into the real world, the real jobs, the actual settings, you can say, hey, I learned this, but it doesn't apply. It doesn't do this. It's not translating. There's so many gaps that are still missing. And, I laugh at him now and I'm like, dude, what the hell, right? But like,
Yeah.
it's,
No, I totally agree there, because
That's just not mimicking what's happening in sport. Yeah, you got a lot of metrics, but it's just one metric and one assessment.
mhm.
That's not really telling you how they're able to force accept in preparation to the reflex that's happening in the stretch shortening cycle. Like, that's not helping you determine that. And that's
Yeah.
a very big component of athletic performance. And yeah, I'm sure that it gives you a lot of value that you can go out to improve some sort of function. But again,
Mhm.
it's not specific to what you're looking at in the environment that you're going to be putting these individuals in.
Let
Uh,
alone the decision-making process that
yeah.
occurs in sport. Like
Mhm.
that's the only thing with some of these tests is like there's zero decisions being made. In sport, there's hundreds of decisions being made in split seconds that put somebody in a position or out of a position.
yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing too, that the experience that you get outside of school if you do go into an environment like this is so valuable, because you understand the culture, you understand the different stakeholders, you understand the like the ability to be flexible and how important that is in that environment, because you're never going to be able to take what you got from a textbook or a research article and fully completely integrated into your system like that. Like, it takes so many different steps. You got to make sure that the people that are in that environment that are overseeing it value it, that the athletes value it, that the coaches value it, and then practicality of things like, all right, how are we going to schedule this into this day, or how frequently can we actually do this because this is even feasible? And that's something that the academia world doesn't know and doesn't understand. But
Yeah,
that's also something that I've been able to learn being in this environment, talking to you guys, is like, yeah, I wish we could do all this crap, but like, that's just not humanly possible. But
sure.
striving to do what we can with those different barriers in place that are attempting to get to optimal data collection and science and stuff, I think is the effort that it takes to get to a level you're performing at the highest in that environment.
Yeah.
And it's never going to be perfect. Like, never going to look like a textbook, but if you
Mhm.
are striving to do that with the barriers and the different stakeholders and how to manage those ins and outs, I think that's where you're doing your best.
Yeah. Yeah,
Because also
absolutely.
trying to force certain criterias and jam it into a system, it's not conducively going to get in there. And maybe we try it, but then it's going to bring about a bunch of other difficulties around the system. So you
Yeah.
got to kind of learn both sides of it for sure.
Well, it's the aspect of like, being rigid but being flexible,
Yep.
right? And understanding what you're attempting to do, how to do it, and then like strategically understanding the organization. I
Mhm.
think that's a big part of it too, is like strategically understanding the organization, what is valued, what is not valued, who values it, right?
Yeah.
Who's the decision maker? All these other things that I think come into play rather than just like, well, I'm here to do my job. It's like, yeah, you are, and you're here to do it at a high level also, but you also need to understand who influences what, how, when, where, how long have they been there. There's so many other context clues that come into play for you to say,
Yeah.
hey, when I say this, when I say this, when I recommend this, when I recommend that,
Yeah.
how is that really going to be interpreted?
And I think that brings about something that I've also talked to you a ton about is like understanding human connection, understanding culture. That is, for me, the most important skill that I think I've developed over the years is how to go into a system, understand, or an organization, understand how they run, understand the different people, the different personalities, and conducively integrate yourself into that system and then bring about change and bring about improvement and optimization. Because if you go into a new job and you're like, all right, I know better, let's fix it, without even becoming quote unquote friends and coworkers with the people around you or them knowing who the hell you are, you're not going to get shit done. Yeah, maybe you learn from the best in the world, but if you can't translate that through human connection, like it doesn't fucking matter, you know? And I think that's how the most successful people in any industry have gotten there. Like, it's not always the most intelligent and experienced and tenured people. It's the people that can manage people the best. And I think we've clicked so well because we've been able to, I think, do both. Like, we're cool as guys and we get along with everybody we're around, but we're also people that are driven to try to learn as much as humanly possible about the things that we're managing to optimize things to the highest degree. And I think it takes both to get to that level. And again, hopefully that's what continues happening in my development over the years.
And I agree with that. I'd add one more thing. I think, well, two more things. One, we're not afraid to ask questions.
Yeah.
And then further that, we're not afraid to ask questions that challenge the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
And ask people, well, why are you doing this? And maybe it's exposure to different things. Like, well, what about this? We're not afraid to challenge in a professional, respectful way to be like, well, we should do this better. And here's how we can do it better. Like, we're not just challenging things just to challenge it. We're providing solutions to it too. Hey, from my previous experience, we've done X, Y, and Z. Here's how we can integrate it here.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that's a lot of value that's brought right away. But the problem is when people are resistant to change, and then it's like you can be disgruntled, right?
Yeah.
But it's okay to ask questions. I think strong, successful organizations allow for questions. They want questions. They ask, what can we do to get better? How can we make this more efficient? What are we not doing? What are we missing the boat on? And having that growth mindset and then empowering those people to make those changes. You know what I'm saying? But we get so limited with our thought process and belief because, like you said, well, we did it okay last year, so it must be really good. Like that mindset, I think, is what keeps you in a very bad spot.
Yeah, and I think the efforts of going about that when there are individuals that are kind of set on their ways is understanding why they think the way they do and being purposeful and like, all right, you've done this for 20 years. I want to learn exactly why and all the different components of why you find this so valuable. And then, maybe we can talk about like, all right, you think that doing that same exact thing in this short time frame would be valuable to the system. And I think that's when the ball gets rolling and I kind of working through that, but no one's really going to listen who is very set on those ways if they don't feel like their perspective and their values are being valued essentially. So I think again, coming through and leading with, all right, I see this personality in front of me. Yeah, they're not doing what I think would optimize the system the best, but why? Why is it? And I want to really dive into that, value exactly their perspective, and then work together and integrate them into the decision process to improve it. Which takes a lot of effort and time, but that's the only thing that I've really seen work in that environment. But it takes a lot. It takes a lot, but
especially if you're the new guy and they're above you or they're your boss or whatever, and you start challenging and you start questioning and you start saying, hey, look, dog, I'm going to run laps around you, but by position, you're above me, so I have to be held down below you. And to me, that's an insecurity of the people in those leadership positions. Like, they don't realize that's just a short mindset thing because they think, oh, well, if I let so-and-so take the handle, take the lead on whatever, then I'm going to look like an idiot. He's gonna outsmart me, blah blah blah. And it's like absolutely not. If you empower them to do those things and allow them to run with it, then you get the aspect of learning with them.
Yes.
Yeah, they'll do the communication. Yeah, they'll do all this other stuff, but it makes your entire department look better.
I
Now, go ahead.
think the best leaders look at things in that fashion. They
Yeah.
really learn who is under them and what they're very strong in and successful in, and allowing them to really grow in those domains. If I come in and I hire a bunch of people and I know they're really, really good at like data collection and working through workload management and really translating that to the coaching staff to make them value it, then yeah, I'm going to let you fucking run with it and do what you need to do. And in that process, I want to learn everything about your system so I can add value and conducively collaborate with you, as opposed to like, oh shit, he thinks that like we should take out my system because it's been done 20 years, and like then the ego comes in and all this stuff. Like, you're not going to be successful. You're not going to bring a culture of improvement, and you're not going to be successful as an organization if you're thinking that way.
Well, I agree with you 100%. I think it also goes back to, okay, well, if you run your department like a business, ask yourself this question. What areas in your department are you weak in, lacking in, don't have, and should probably have?
Yeah.
Okay, so then you go, okay, well, we don't have any data. Well, what the fuck? Why not? Oh, well, nobody here knows how to do it. So that means either you outsource it or you hire somebody that does know how to do it. And then when you hire them, you say, you tailor it to the shit. This is who the fuck we're looking for. If you're coming in to do that, I want you to be the best at that.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we don't have somebody that's really good at whatever else. You could say data, you could say tech, you could say whatever other element as you look at. Maybe somebody's really good at hamstring PT. Okay, great. Well, we're kind of average, but let's bring this person in. Let's bring an expert, if you will, or somebody that's really good at this thing, and pay them. And then we can all learn and grow. So then if you look at it across your department as a whole, right? Or like somebody from a nutritional standpoint, like, hey, we don't know, we have guys that know nutrition, but we want a dietitian, right? Okay, well, from that standpoint, well, how do I then bring that person in, allow them and ask them to grow their department tremendously and say, hey, here you go. Like, you're going to crush this. You're going to be amazing at this. We're going to love that, et cetera, et cetera. And allow them to do it, and then allow them to do it, and then learn with them and have conversation, do all these things. But the thing is that so many people just don't want to do that. It's like, as the leader, this is where a lot of people from a work standpoint won't agree with this, but like as a business leader, an owner or whatever, your number one job, like, okay, let's look at it in the context of a head coach. The head coach's number one job is to hire people to do the jobs so the head coach can focus on higher leverage things, right? That's the entire goal of it, right? He's then focused on orchestrating the offense and the defense and the special teams. And, he's maybe not always in the schematics, but maybe he is. So, right?
Yeah.
The head coach's job is to hire people to do the other tasks that free him up to do higher leverage things. Same thing as a department head. Your job should be to hire people to do those other tasks to free you up to then manage and control at a higher level echelon, right? But a lot of people don't think about it. They're like, well, I'm an AT, so I have to always be doing that. I'm a strength and conditioning coach, so I always need to be on the floor. It's like, absolutely not. Yeah. Absolutely not at all. But a lot of people don't think about it from that mindset.
Yeah, and it takes very open-mindedness in that environment to be successful, and also just not dictating. Oh, my letters is my identity. I think that is also a drawback, because that slows down the collaborative effort. And like, oh, I'm not touching that because look, my letters don't say that, or oh, this is mine and mine only because my letters dictate this.
Yeah.
And that again, just it's not conducive to growth and collaboration. I think I've fully integrated myself into learning about the performance world, but I try to do that with every domain that I work with. I try to do that fully with the athletic training world, with emergency management of things. I try to do that with the nutrition world. I try to do that with the physicians. A big one with me is physicians. and even coaches, skill coaches, like learning the different skills that they're trying to develop, the different whoa, words are very hard. What they need to do out in the field and how they need to look.
Just how they see things, the
Demands, all
lens.
the demands and the different variability of function and the different planes of motion that they move in. Like I'm learning that from the skill coaches. And if I can integrate little grains of that throughout my rehab process to facilitate what is happening in that end, or making sure that those people are integrated through different phases where that's important. For example, a nutritionist allowing me to have access or helping me work with an athlete about giving them more collagen through different phases of healing, or more protein, more carbs when we start ramping up our training and our rehab. Like that's super important. And obviously working with the coaches and understanding like, all right, he needs to go back and do that specific skill in the field, but like we haven't integrated any high velocity cutting yet, so they're not going to be able to move in that plane yet. So I think it takes a very open mind to be successful in this environment, and trying to learn from and value every domain and every aspect of it. Because then you're, again, working in silos, and that doesn't get anything done.
Yep. And the byproduct of all this communication, understanding, thought process is you develop better relationships with people and hypothetically help yourself get paid more, have longer lasting jobs, better relationships, and you enjoy going to work because you guys are now continuously solving more and different problems together rather than just not at all, you know?
Yeah. And again, back to leadership, like a leader fully like investing themselves into the development of their employees, I think is important. And a lot of people don't see it that way. They're like, all right, you're my worker, go do jobs, you know, as opposed to no, you're part of this system, you're part of this community, and I want you to become the best version of yourself. And yeah, if that entails you getting a raise within our system or going to a better organization or growing in your specific role, like I want that, because I want people under me to grow and improve, you know, not just like, all right, just go and do the things that I need you to do, and I don't want you to bother me. We're not going to develop a rapport. We're not going to develop a friendship or any type of higher level connection. And that's just not optimal, because I come across a lot of really, really successful coaches because I know like their family tree of coaching, and all the high level coaches have one, you know, because they are able to output and grow all these different individuals within their coaching staff for them to go out and do bigger things and become heads or department heads and stuff of that nature. That's what molds and I think fosters that high level work and work ethic and desire to grow in an individual.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I look at an example of like Alabama, right? You know, Saban has been there for a hot minute, but all of the, you know, a lot of, not all, but a lot of the offensive coordinators and position coaches and defensive coordinators, et cetera, have moved on to bigger and better things as head coaches, et cetera. So when you look at development of staffs, when you look at development of other things from that standpoint, you can say, hey, look, that's a good example to look at, right? He's been there. He's developed people. They've gotten bigger and better jobs. He's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but he's saying, hey, like, go do this. I want you to be successful. I hope you do really good things, etc. And they have the ultimate respect for him, and he has the ultimate respect for them. So it's like the model has been proven to you, you know, when you allow people below you to do a great job, yeah, they're going to leave or you're going to have to pay them more, which is fine. You should embrace both. But when you just hold them down and then the staff gets fired, and it's just a repetitive cycle. It's like you can choose one or the other. But anyway,
I think that brings about better work ethic, more desire to be successful in the system because the people around you care about you and want you to succeed. And obviously growth, which is always what most people in this industry do want to do if they're at a high level.
Yeah, absolutely. Closing thoughts, Mr. Santiago.
Yeah, no, dude, I think, like I said, that integration is hopefully something I've learned to grow within, and just learn as much as I can from great minds such as yourself, to better manage the things that are in my domain as a clinician. Because there's no better way to do it. Like, you're not going to be able to do this from straight out of school. And it takes a lot of purposeful management of people around you and the system that you're in to be really, really successful. And I do think that, like I said, if you want to be a high level clinician in the sports performance world, in the sport world, I mean, you have to have a very integrate, or you're always going to optimize things way better if you have an integrate, a very fleshed out understanding of what it takes to build the foundation of those athletes, and just be open-minded about the different domains that you're going to work with and trying to learn from those domains as well to try to supplement things through your own work. Because there's no better way to do it. Like, that is proven by the Alabamas of the world and the high level and successful professional league organizations, that hybrid and collaborative effort of the different support staff practitioners is what is going to optimize human performance. And I think it does take being able to put a different hat on and both do it yourself if that's what is required of your organization, or better prepare yourself to collaborate with those different domains. Whether that be strength and sports science, which is a big thing, or strength and PT, or ATPT, like understanding and really diving into maybe getting credentialed in those different domains, or just working and collaborating and learning from those different philosophies and systems is what's going to get you to be the most successful in this environment. So,
Absolutely. Well, I thought that was fantastic. I want to appreciate you and say thank you for your time, and thank you for what you are doing, our friendship, our professional life together as well. And just say thank you for your time today. It was fantastic. This was great. This was a great conversation, and look forward to hearing more about you and seeing you here soon. For those that don't know you, they should start to know you and follow you and do everything out from that standpoint. So I think that's awesome. I just want to say thank you for that, man.
appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Do us a huge favor, share the show, okay? If you listened all the way through, which you should, there's a lot of things talked about from a multitude of different lenses, a multitude of different professions. But do us a huge favor, share the show. It's the only way the show grows. If you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you're on Spotify, Apple, leave a review and let a friend know. So until then, Santi, we'll catch y'all and everybody else later. Thank you for your time, dog, and I will talk to you real soon.
All right, man.